So how do people describe the country or community where you come from? Do they say it's a superpower? Do they say it's vibrant? Are you a tiger economy? Or like most of the world, up and coming? Well, I'll tell you what seems to be a common descriptor for the community where I come from, Malawi, in most literature and common speech. They say that we are a poor country, the poorest country in the world. Now, I think I know why Malawi is poor, and interestingly, it is because we have a phobia of being poor. Now, you see, when people have a phobia for something, it's an irrational fear. Some people have a fear for spiders, and other people are afraid of being around a group of people, also known as agoraphobia. But what's really interesting is that poor communities seem to share an irrational fear for being poor. Now, when you have a phobia or have an irrational fear of something, you tend to put it at the center of your life and make it a part of your lived experience. And take, for example, in Malawi, where we put money at the center of our existence, right? For example, we use it to express condolences at a funeral. And sometimes we take money and we throw it around at weddings instead of confetti. In my culture, if you want to say thank you, you sometimes use money. Now, I don't know about you, but I think this is unhealthy for a poor community. Not only is it only unhealthy, but it's also very, very destructive. Now, some of you would be wondering, how is it that you can get a group of people to have a collective phobia? Or what about people who don't have a chance of being poor, have a fear of even being poor? And you see, that's the main symptom of having a phobia, is that it's an unreasonable and excessive desire to avoid this said fear. Like take, for example, top-serving high civil servants in the Malawi government, whose chances of getting poor is in negative digits, and their likelihood for poverty should not be even a cause for any of that fear. And yet in the year 2014, during Cashgate, we learned something very interesting, that even people who don't have a chance of being poor are afraid of being poor. Cashgate in Malawi was a systematic public looting of finances by top-serving high government officials. Some civil servants were found with thousands of US dollars in their vehicles. And an independent report that was published tells us that this was done under a distrustful operations amounting to up to $6.1 billion, which is close to about 16.1 billion kwacha, which is about $14.5 billion. You can do the math later, really. And this is very scary because this was done under distrustful operations paid out to companies for services that were never actually rendered. And this tells us something. Isn't it scary that our fear for poverty is actually what has made us the poorest country in the world? Now, I too have a phobia, and my fear is to live in a country that is dominated by fear. I just possibly can't do that. But my fear is not as irrational. You see? Because I believe that poor communities don't always necessarily have to go through this. They don't always have to have political distrust, corruption, and high levels of youth unemployment. I even imagine Malawi in the next decade to come being economically stronger and politically stable. Maybe they'll say we're up and coming, and perhaps the P in poverty will no longer stand for phobia. See, right now I'm working in an interesting space for development between theory and practice. And I'll let you into a glimpse of what that life is like for me right now. As a theorist, I'm an academic. I teach English literature at Chancellor College. And my postgraduate research has opened up a new world for me that allows me to theorize different aspects of poverty and its linguistic makeup in vernacular languages, and look at it from different angles in Afro-fantasy and post-apocalyptic fiction. All these fancy things you hear about literary scholars. And this world has been great for me because it's allowed me to see different aspects. And most importantly, it's told me something about fiction, that fiction can inform our reality, the reality in the world that we live in, sometimes more strongly than anything else. Like, I'll tell you what I've learned from fantasy, that Malawi is afraid of having money. I'm sure many years ago when George R. R. Martin, the writer of a book called A Game of Thrones, sat down to write this epic, he didn't think that it would somewhat inform Malawian culture. And And in Game of Thrones, there is a community of people called the Dothraki. That's one of the leaders from the Dothraki. His name is Khal Drogo. And you can just see by the sense of the language how barbaric he sounds. And ideally, what this community is meant to do, it's supposed to be an indigenous, really barbaric community. And what sometimes writers would do when they realize that English is not sufficient enough to carry the weight of the community they're trying to represent in literature, they'll create a new one. They'll create a new language. And so George R. Martin, the writer of this text, and the linguist he worked with, David J. Peterson, stumbled upon something very interesting about language and society. That you can sometimes take away aspects of a language in order to ensure you're getting your point across. Like, for example, the Dothraki don't have a polite way of speaking about themselves. Their lexicon, that is to say their vocabulary, doesn't have the words please and thank you. And naturally, what that happens in language is that the rest of your linguistic capability will organically arrange itself in order to make up this slack, which is a fancy way of saying if you do not have a way of being polite in your language, you instantly become barbaric. Chinua Achebe believed that language is a carrier of culture. And you can see this like in the Chichewa language. Chichewa is my vernacular tongue and a very interesting one. And my study has shown me interesting aspects about Chichewa and how we speak about money. You get examples from people such as Kajakakalipo, which roughly translates to, is that small thing available? Or when somebody does a piece of work at your house, they'll say, Munene ndinu ya bwana, which translates to, you tell me the value for the work I have done. When you're coming from the bank, take a lot, okay? Or I was not given anything for the work that I did. Now this is scary. Because just like its equivalent, just like Kajakakalipe and its equivalent, Kangachepe, you notice that this thing being spoken about is constantly small. And there's an absent referential, which is an interesting linguistic way of saying the thing that we're talking about is absent in these sentences. It's a thing. Money is a thing. That we're so afraid to talk about money that we'll never mention it. We'll skirt around it and do an evasive dance around language. Now, clearly this is scary because it has shown us that our language has demanded that we must remain poor up to this point. Now, here's an interesting fact for me. If the Dothraki in a Game of Thrones don't have a direct way to talk about politeness, does the fact that we don't have a direct way to talk about money make us poor? I don't know. The second world in which I work is also just as interesting. I work and I've seen in this space my theory evolve and develop, which very few academics tend to see. Notice how I keep asking you guys to go do degrees in English. But I work for an interesting organization called the Art and Global Health Center Africa, and I'm the director of a youth leadership program called Students with Dreams. Those are the guys that I work with. And we've learned something thought-provoking working with Art and Global at Students with Dreams, that the fear or phobia for poverty can actually be reversed. In another interesting text by the same author I've mentioned, Chinua Achebe, called The Antis of the Savannah, he asks a really profound question. And he says, how do we appease an embittered history? And in this context, for me, I would like to ask, how do we appease a history that is embittered with phobia? You see, the fear of money has made us to do some really, really interesting things, you see? And it has almost deterred us from innovation and seeing ahead, being able to recognize an idea and then seeing the money that can come from this idea. Take, for example, many years ago when the Malawi government arrested Gabriel Kondosi, which you see there. He had built a radio station. And this radio station was made out of TV aerials and cab batteries, and he had a Nokia cell phone, no solar panel, amongst other interesting things that he had used. And you can tell, well, you can't really tell from the outside, but inside he had designed it so that it was acoustically available for radio sounds and everything to go on and happen in there. The Malawi government arrested him because he was operating without a license. Now, come on. Imagine in a decade to come a government that sees the idea that if you look beyond this, you see a media house or a big telecommunications company. And that first, if you have an idea, you can start seeing the money. Maybe it could bring us the money. Thank you. And this is a very interesting spot for us. The idea that money can come if you first see the idea. With Students with Dreams, this is what some of the things that I've learned. What our model does is it brings really creative individuals and puts them together. And they start to brainstorm the ideas and they can focus on exactly what they want to do. And then they realize that they can get some money that they need to execute their ideas. One thing that I learned was that most of the ideas are actually executed for far less money than the people expected. They're not so anxious about money anymore. And the fact that they're not so anxious about money makes them generate money. That's where there's an interesting paradox. I'd like to give you an example of two powerful leaders that I've been working with in a project called Loud Inc. That's Madalo Banda and Leko Di Magombo. They started a project called Loud Inc. called Righting Wrongs in order to go into local secondary schools to talk about different aspects of young children's lives. So they go there and listen to different stories, poverty, disability, all these stories that they don't have the vocabulary for or a way to talk about their lives because of the rigorous metric system in the education system. And they're putting this together in a book that will be published called Righting Wrongs and distributed for free around Malawi. Now I'll tell you two interesting facts. The first is public knowledge. Madalo has been acknowledged by the prestigious Queen's Young Leaders Award, and she'll be going to the UK to get her prestigious award directly from the Queen herself as I speak. Okay? Now this is something you don't know. The pair of them started this project and completed it with 120,000 kwacha, which is the equivalent of $174. What does that teach me? First the idea, and then the money. You see, one of the interesting things that I've done, studying research and doing these things that I've just explained to you, is the fact that there's things that are culturally embedded with us that we don't recognize. And they manifest themselves in different ways. Whether you're a top-serving government official or a civil servant, whether it's in the day-to-day speech when you're talking about money or not talking about money, you find that there's things in us that are taught at a young age that we must learn to exercise as we're growing older. When I was slightly younger, we went to the village, and it was an interesting culture for me. The village was really interesting. There's a slight compound around where we live, where my aunts live and my uncles, and it's really interesting how it's big and it's a community. And while we were at the village, an older relative came to me, and she gave me money, and she said, "Could you please take this across the compound to give it to a different relative of mine?" And I was like, yeah, whatever, I can do that. So I took the money and I ran across to the compound. And I got there and I took the money out of my pocket, I stretched the bills, and I gave it to my relative. And there were a bunch of relatives that were just around watching, and most of them were adults, and they sort of just looked down when I handed the money. Now, even at that age, I was perceptive. I knew that something was wrong. And so I waited. Later on in the evening, the adult that sent me to go and give this money came, and she stooped down to my level, and then she said, "I'm not shouting at you, but you did something wrong today." And I looked very puzzled. That is not how we give money in Malawian culture. When you're given money to give to someone, you take it. When you pull it out of your pocket, you must squeeze it in your hand. When you squeeze it in your hand and you pass it on to the adult or whoever you're giving it to, pass it to them secretively so that no one knows the amount that you've given to the other person. Now, this part of history is important for me, and it's a beginning chapter of a novel of mine that my team and I are trying to get to the rest of the world by sometime next year, called The Judas Apology. And this character, like me, realizes something, that we have come contact with a culture that demands that we must be secretive about money. Now, for me, as a writer, as a scholar, as somebody who's directing a young youth leadership program and hoping to prototype the future of leadership in Malawi, I have demanded of myself to foreground this moment of a culture that is afraid to speak about money, a phobia that it shares with so many poor communities around the world. But that is okay, because we're moving into a new era, an era that we're writing ourselves into, where we can demand more from ourselves to see first the idea and then the money. Thank you.